dealing with toxic levels of authentic masculinity, I would say good luck. But luck is for pagans.
And welcome to the Catholic Command Show. We are the Lord's team, the winning side. So raise your glass. I'm Adam Minahan, sitting with David Niles and our buddy Thomas Lackey. We just got done talking about the Eucharist. If you're listening to this via podcast, go back and make sure to check that one out. That was a lot of fun. If you're listening via radio, you can always subscribe to our podcast via iTunes or your favorite podcast player. But we're going round two. This is the second episode that we're doing in one day. Have we done that before, Dave?
I don't know. I was trying to think about that.
I don't think we've done two in one day. At least that I can recall.
Yeah, I don't know.
But we have our good friend Thomas here. We said last episode, and it remains true through this episode, that he's probably our smartest friend. And so we were happy to have him along. And we figured if we can get him here, because you live about 40 minutes away.
About 40. It's not too bad.
But
yeah,
we figured, like, once we got him here, we better keep him here for a little bit. So, this episode, we're doing the same thing as last episode. We are kind of throwing the format out the window this go around. I'm drinking a little of IPA. You're having, you're still having your...
I'm sticking with Johnny Walker Green. It's
okay. And you're having tea that I brought from China.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's
now, what kind of tea is it again?
It's a pu'er tea.
See, he knew more than I did.
Yeah, it's really, really good. It's very dark, strong, manly tea.
and it's
really
good.
Earth tones, right? We have some
Yeah.
friends who are big tea drinkers. Shout out David Bates, restlesspilgrim.net. But tell us just a little bit more about it. It's
Okay.
earth tones.
Yeah. So they take the leaves and they bury them under the ground to ferment for sometimes years. I mean, you can every now and again you'll see a pu'er tea and it's like labeled like vintage, like, oh, this is the 1997 or something like this, and it's like it'll have a year attached to it, but it gives it a very, very earthy taste. As I said when we were drinking earlier, there's kind of like an almost potting soil quality to it, and you're like, oh, that sounds terrible. No, it's very refreshing. Go try some if you haven't had it. It's really good.
You mean potting soil?
I mean the tea.
Oh, the tea, right?
The tea.
Okay.
It's just really good stuff, and I've never had this particular one before, and it's fantastic. So,
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
What I like about it is that it's not bitter.
No,
So it's just the flavor of the tea without the bitterness.
Yeah, and no matter, even though it's a very, very dark tea, it doesn't matter how long you steep it, it won't get bitter, which is not true of most teas. Most teas, if you oversteep them, the tannins come out, it gets bitter really quickly. But this one, it just gets stronger. It never ever gets bitter.
Sweet. Okay, so we talked about the Eucharist last episode. This episode is one that I've been trying to have for quite a while, and I just couldn't find. We talked with Carlo Broussard from Catholic Answers not too long ago on the importance of philosophy. You should go back and check that out. That was a really fun episode. He's awesome.
Yeah.
But we didn't have time to really sink our teeth into, here are some philosophers that men should know about, read about, study, and understand their way of thinking to help us today understand our way of thinking. And so I asked you to come up, because you're kind of a philosopher. I mean, you've done some philosophy. You write some philosophy.
I certainly like reading it. It's and the tricky part was coming up with only a few, right? Because I think we could do this. We could like repeat this podcast as a series, and like
10
always
times.
be pulling up new names,
right?
So because there's been a lot of people over the years,
right?
So,
but we're gonna stick to we're gonna try to stick to 5 today.
Yeah, I think so.
Let's talk about, or just list the 5 that we're gonna talk about, because some of them I don't know much about.
Yeah, we're gonna go I did not think of any particular order, like read these in this order or something. I just like pick names.
Okay.
So we're gonna talk about Soren Kierkegaard, and then we're going to talk about Cicero.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're going to talk about Augustine, Anselm, and Aquinas.
Okay.
So we've got 1 Protestant, 1 pagan, and 3 Catholics.
Okay.
They all come into a bar and they start talking.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's talk. Let's start it off. Because Let's try to at least knock out one.
Yeah. Let's start with Kierkegaard. So Kierkegaard, I picked him because, and he, I think, would be, in the good sense, kind of a focus on individual. Right now, I've heard Terry the Marshall say the other day, "Oh, don't use it individual." He doesn't like, but
he said that on our podcast. Yeah.
So, but
I've tried to not say it sometimes, and it's like
tough.
I don't know what other word.
Yeah, I'm gonna.
Because sometimes the word person just doesn't
fit well
into the
and
conversation.
Kierkegaard uses the term self quite a bit as a self, which kind of works sometimes, but he also uses individual. And the reason I want to highlight him is, he's sometimes kind of almost put out like a somebody you'd read in college and feel all rebellious and something like that, almost like Nietzsche or somebody. And I don't really think that's doing Kierkegaard justice. It's like this phase people go through, and when they're 18 or whatever, and they read Kierkegaard and they shake their fist at the established order, and then they move on. And there's an article on First Things from years back called Kierkegaard for Grown-Ups, which I would recommend going and find, and kind of deals with that. We won't have time to get into all that today, but what Kierkegaard does so well is he doesn't let you off the hook. He makes you try to consider your actions in an absolute sense as opposed to relative to other people. And that's a very, to fit the Catholic Man show, I'd say that's a very manly kind of like quality, is to say, I'll even read it. I'll start off with a quote because it'll kind of give you the flavor of Kierkegaard. Okay. So some people had asked about like other sources, and we'll get with that, like to contemporary sources for reading about Aquinas or somebody like that. With Kierkegaard, just go read Kierkegaard. A lot of his stuff's available free online, and no one else could quite, I think, capture his. He's got a very ironic way of writing. He's harsh but witty at the same time. So anyway, here we go. Here's a quote. In eternity, it is not asked whether your marriage was in accordance with others, with the common practice, or whether it was better than others, but you as an individual will be asked only whether it was in accordance with your responsibility. For common practice changes, and all comparison goes lame or is only half truth. But eternity's practice, which never goes out of fashion, is that you are the individual, that you yourself and the intimate relation of marriage should have been conscious of this. That's a flavor, a taste of him. He's always saying that, you can't be comparing yourself to others because you stand under the judgment of God, who asks, not how did you treat your children compared to the other people on your block? How did you fulfill your responsibility before eternity?
So is he the Protestant?
He is.
Okay,
he is.
I just want to make sure. And do you know roughly when he was around?
Yeah, 1800s.
1800s.
Yeah. Okay. So if you want to set him against someone, like in a sort of dialogue, he's really an anti-Hegelian type philosophy. So you've got Hegel and Marx and others. They are all about kind of the idea of a collective. He's trying to reel that back in and saying being a member of a group isn't enough, right? It's like, he complains a lot about what he calls the established order, and this is often made in reference to the church, not really so much the Catholic Church, because of course he's Protestant, but the idea here is that he's trying to get is that we seem to have this notion of a kind of creeping Christendom where we're all Christians now, and but his idea is it's not enough that the church has faith. Right? Yes, the church has faith. We acknowledge that. Do you believe it? Do you have faith? It's not enough to say, well, I'm a member of a church and that church has faith. It's like, or the church has doctrines. It's like, do you know them and do you believe them? Because it's not enough that the church has them.
So was his thought process more of like, the more that you actually help yourself, like as far as like becoming more virtuous man or however, the more it actually helps the community?
No, I don't think that would be where I'd go to. I think it's more about the idea of responsibility and no excuses, right? That you stand as an individual before God. And, when he asks you questions about how you live your life, you can't say, well, I think I did better than Dave. That's not how it works, right?
Right. Okay.
So let me ask you this, because when you're in the history of all these, there's all these philosophers. I would imagine that in order for a philosopher to stand out in history, it was not simply because they agreed with all the other philosophers who have come before them. They they had to take a stand that was maybe different, or like make their mark on philosophy. What was his deal? You know what I mean?
Well, he stands at the beginning of existentialist philosophy, so there's that. Now, that's normally associated with the idea that the existence precedes essence, so that that something is like a thing before it is sort of determinate as to what the essence of the thing is.
I'm not sure I agree with that.
I don't either, but Kierkegaard, strangely enough, wouldn't either. But there is this idea of becoming that he's dealing with the idea that I'm going to make a completely sideways analogy, but St. Basil writes something to the effect of that we're created in God's image and His likeness. But he said that we're given the image, the likeness is yet to be accomplished, right? So they said otherwise, where would there be merit? I would think that Kierkegaard's view is a little bit more like that, right? That we start, but we have choices. And those choices matter as to what we're ultimately going to become.
Okay, so what book would you recommend to read of his?
Okay, I would say the Sickness Unto Death would be a good place to start, or Purity of Heart.
Okay.
All right.
Sickness Unto Death or Purity of Heart. We're going to keep going, talking about philosophers that you, as a man, as a Catholic man, should know, read, study. I'm here with Thomas Lackey and my best bud, Dave. We're on the Lord's team.
The winning side.
So raise your glass.
I fixed the thing.
Good job, dude. That was really good.
Instead of, I had it fading, which means
yeah.
it fades into the output slot instead of simply playing.
Playing it.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, so the next one is going to be who?
It's going to be Cicero, but since we'll get this we won't get it on the radio, but we'll get it in the thing. I'll give you another Kierkegaard quote. It's interesting because he's Protestant. This becomes an interesting quote. I said, "What then shall we do if the questions sound like accusations? Above all else, each one will himself become an individual with his responsibility to God. Each one will himself be subject to the stern judgment of this individuality. Is this not the purpose of the office of confession? Those who are coming to confess do not belong together in a society. Each one is an individual before God. Man and wife may go to confession in beautiful fellowship with each other, but they may not confess together. The one who confesses is not in company. He is an individual alone with God."
Why would he say all that if he's not Catholic?
That's a good question. He actually wrote one little throwaway line in his journal. It's the effect of, "There's now no objection to the Catholic Church," but I don't know that he ever followed that up in any way.
Charles on Facebook said that Fear and Trembling is a good one as well.
Yeah. Actually, I would definitely recommend the preface to Fear and Trembling, which you can find online without too much trouble. The preface alone is fantastic.
Okay, let's carry on.
Yep.
My wayward son. Nailed it. Welcome back to the Catholic Man Show. I'm David Niles. Here with Adam Minahan, we are once again joined by our friend Thomas Lackey. As you can see,
There he is.
He's a man. He's a man of hats and jackets
And beards.
and
Or
tea.
beard.
Beard.
I think
Yeah.
beard.
I don't think any man is a man of many beards.
That's,
That would be weird.
yeah,
That would be-
I don't even know. I don't know how to follow up that.
what that means.
There is
But
an
you know what?
awesome St. Augustine beard quote that I need to try to find maybe before this is over.
Yeah, he's talking about the bearded man.
The bearded
Sometimes,
man,
like
yeah.
Saint Joseph or some of the saints, their beard splits into two beards.
It's still just one beard, though.
I know, but it's like it has the soul of two beards.
Well, actually, that's that quote because it's repeated in the Psalm. It ran down the beard of Aaron, and it's like, why does it repeat the beard? Unfortunately, I don't remember the rest of the quote.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't either.
Yeah.
Okay, but we've been talking about
Beards are awesome.
keep rubbing it in, guys. Keep rubbing it in. We're talking about philosophers today. So we just got done with Kierkegaard.
Yeah.
Did I say that right?
Yeah, you did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dutch guy, you said.
Yeah, and
Dutch.
he's a lot of fun to read. He's got a good sense of humor as well.
Okay.
So, like I said, he won't let you really off the hook.
Okay, so in this next segment, we've got to get through more than one.
Yeah, we gotta go fast. Let's go with Cicero. So as the next, as a good guy to read. So he's I would say he's a very practical philosopher. I mean, philosophy is very much as lived out in the moral sense. It's not enough to think about these things. You have to do them. You have to live them. And I mean, I don't know that many philosophers would necessarily disagree with that, but certainly the whole kind of Stoic school and there's a kind of a group, the Greco-Roman moralists, they're kind of grouped together. So you get Cicero and Epictetus and Plutarch and all those. They fall into this category.
Plutarch.
Yeah.
What a dumb name.
So you get all these, and they're like grouped together, and they're all about living out a virtuous life.
Okay.
Plutarch
sounds like a name from Spaceballs or something. You know what I mean?
How about Xenophon? There you go. Yeah. So
okay. So a little background on Cicero.
Yeah. So lived just before the and really during the fall of the Roman Republic. He's often classified as a Stoic, but he kind of borrows from a bunch of schools of philosophy. He's eclectic in that regard. He I would say there's a kind of core Stoicism there, but he'll borrow from the others, from other schools as well, kind of make up his own.
So Stoicism, for those who don't know, would you say that's essentially like grit and bear it?
Yeah, so there's a famous saying kind of attributed to Epictetus. I don't think he actually said this, but that it can more or less be summed up in the idea to suffer and abstain. Now, you'd think, oh, yeah, you're just being tough. No, he's actually talking about evil. You should bear evils done to you, but you should abstain from doing evils to anyone else. So, I mean, there's nothing to object to in that statement.
No.
Mm-mm.
No, and I think where you get with Cicero is very much the idea of the duties that a man has to his family, to the state, to his friends, and that those are imposed true moral obligations that you need to basically be a man and fulfill. And
so he really focused on virtue,
very much on virtue, and the not being
and
tempted,
he's pagan.
He's a pagan, yet, but not being tempted into seeing, into choosing what might look like the easier course versus the better course. And as a pagan, this is interesting to think, because I'll read this about half a quote, but it's a great quote. And he said, if he thinks that wrongdoing ought indeed to be shunned, but that death, poverty, or pain is much more to be shunned, he errs in imagining any evil affecting the bodily condition or property to be greater consequence than moral evil. So this is so he makes this distinction between your everlasting soul, which he does affirm, particularly in the Dream of Scipio, which is one of his things, writings, that the soul is everlasting, and you're just making a huge mistake if you think that basically any natural evil that you would suffer here or hardship that you would go through could be worth sinning.
See, both Cicero and I'm not, I haven't done a whole lot of reading of Cicero. I mean, but he and Marcus Aurelius, when I read both of their writings, it just blows my mind that when I read this, I'm like, how do you look at this, or how do you write this down and then not be Catholic, or not then persecute the church?
Yeah, Aurelius is tougher because of course Cicero lives before Christ, but
right.
But I mean, Aurelius, you read so much, and there is a strong compatibility between much of what's said, and then but it's like falls short of that last step. And one way to do that for Cicero is Cicero talks a lot about giving, naturally about justice, but even the sense of like if someone helped you, that you have that extra level of obligation when they're in need to help them. But if you think about that, we've reached justice. We haven't gone that next step to charity, right? So it's kind of like the pagan philosophers would get you so far, but they won't take that. They won't
jump
the next jump. And but Cicero's great. I mean, I highly recommend reading it. Most of his most famous works are pretty short, and he's a very clear writer as well. So read On Moral Duty. The Latin title is De Officiis, and then on Friendship, which is excellent, De Amicitia,
Does he borrow a lot of Aristotle stuff
He borrows a little
on friendship?
He borrows a little. I mean, I think I don't know how much Aristotle he would have read. I would say that the concepts are substantially similar.
Okay. All right, let's get on to the next one because we only
right.
have a certain amount of time.
Yeah, so let's hop ahead to
Now we're in the Catholic realm now.
Yeah, we're in the Catholic realm.
all
now.
Catholic from here
so
on
let's
out.
go with Saint Anselm, who's one of my favorites, and you don't hear talked about very much.
I hear you talk about him.
Yeah, so
a lot.
when you hear people talk about Saint Anselm, they're usually talking about his ontological argument, which is an attempt to prove the existence of God from kind of the definition of God. I'm actually not going to talk about that because it's kind of a sidetrack, and it's not kind of not where I'd like to go. What I think is a great place to start with Saint Anselm is to read either On Free Will or even better On the Fall of the Devil, and that
would be interesting.
It's a very interesting read, and the idea he tries to get across, the kind of big ideas thing, is that we're created with a will that has kind of two capacities. It's the will to do the right thing, the will for justice, and the will to do what we think is, for personal advantage. And that if you only had one or the other, there would never be any real cause for merit, right? Because if you were like an animal that only willed to do whatever you thought you wanted right then you wouldn't be morally blameworthy for doing something that was unjust. Like basically your will would have been necessitated. There'd be no choice in the matter. But likewise, if you were created with a will that only willed the right thing and never, it had no ability to, to look at advantage, there'd be no opportunity. Again, you wouldn't have had any moral sort of quality to the decision. It would have been a necessity. Now, so he reconciles these two tensions, in that we've got to will the right thing for the right reason, right? We've got to will justice for justice's sake, and be willing to in some case to sacrifice the advantage, or what we think is the advantage. And he talking of the devil and of the angels, what thing it is that they might have desired, he doesn't actually go into. He said there's something yet that they might have desired or did desire, that basically Lucifer and the fallen angels reached out and tried to take and fell, and the holy angels retained the will for justice, to willing God's will first, and that they merited then as a reward the very thing that they would have tried desired.
To take. Yeah.
And so now there's no more tension between the wills. I want to point that out. So it's like, well, why can't they fall again? And it's like, because basically the tension has been completely resolved, and that they've been made completely perfect in the sense of their satisfaction. And of course, if we wanted to tie in a little Aquinas to this, we would get the idea that in the beatific vision, there to be face to face with God, who has all goodness. There's nothing else that you could ever desire.
Yeah. What do you want?
Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah. Exactly.
You have it.
Selfish.
You've got it. Yeah.
You have everything.
You can't be.
So yeah. So I mean,
Right.
so Augustine. Augustine. Anselm is awesome. So
Okay, so some of the works you said again, remind me.
yeah. So I would say that the two On the Fall of the Devil and On Free Will are the two I'd recommend reading first. His famous ones are good too, like the Proslogion, but just the ontological argument is kind of its own podcast.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So, and when did he live?
Anselm? Yeah, 1100s, give or
Ish.
take. Yeah.
Okay.
So he winds up being the bridge between the scholastics that come later and the Augustinian philosophers that come after. So it's right at the reintroduction of Aristotle. He's more maybe on the Augustinian Platonic side, but he's like the beginning of the scholastic way of arguing.
Which I like. I'm a big
Yeah.
fan of It's just like,
No, you're not.
But
yeah, I am.
But
No,
he also
you're
writes
definitely not.
dialogues, by the way, which is something
You
that
don't
you
know.
you don't really see that come as much later.
Okay. So we're here with Thomas Lackey talking about different philosophers that every man should know about, read about, care about, and why. When we get back, we're going to continue the conversation. We're on the Lord's team.
The winning side.
So raise your glass.
So during the break, I'll read an Anselm quote. So we'll get the Anselm quote. So neither by willing happiness alone, nor by willing only that which befits its nature, could that angel be called moral or immoral, because his will would be necessitated. On the other hand, if he neither can nor ought to be happy, if he does not will, and if his will is not morally good, God must harmonize the two wills in him such that he wills to be happy, but wills it justly. So that's kind of the of course, they always say it's shorter than we can, because
Yeah.
Because they're better at it than we are.
yeah,
We've got to keep going.
Okay.
yeah.
This one, we only have 2 left, right? So
Yeah,
this
we're gonna
one-
have to pack in Augustine and Aquinas in one.
Yeah, so you got 12 minutes for Augustine and Aquinas, 12 minutes.
Oh, one each. Yeah.
Yeah,
okay,
because we
nice.
got, yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Welcome back to the Catholic Man Show. I'm sitting here drinking a little bit of IPA. Dave's having a little bit of a blended Scotch whiskey.
I've got tea. Very delicious
Thomas.
tea.
Thomas has tea from China. We're talking about 5 philosophers that guys should know about, think about, read about, study. And obviously, we said this last break, or the break before, we said this actually could be, we could repeat this podcast 10 times. We're going to obviously not hit philosophers that you're going to listen to and be like, why did you not talk about this guy?
Right.
I get that. We only have 5, we have 48 minutes. We can only fit 5 in.
Yeah.
Cut us some slack, guys.
Yeah, I mean, if we would try to I think we were talking about like five old ones, 5 fairly recent ones, and then it came out. I mean, how are you going to do that with 2 or 3 minutes each?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, it's just not.
So for our next one, we're actually going to go with a guy who's still alive by the name of Thomas Lackey. Oh, I'm sorry.
No.
You're the guest, Thomas. All
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
What? How many?
And actually, we're talking about Augustine this episode,
Right,
or
yeah.
this segment.
I
Yeah.
know. I was
Okay.
So
just kidding.
So for Augustine, I mean, I don't know that he takes a lot of introduction in the Catholic
that's-
sphere.
I agree.
So what I am going to say though is everybody should read the Confessions. The Confessions are awesome, but I think the theme I would want to draw on would be from the City of God, which is kind of his masterpiece.
I mean, it is huge. I mean,
Yeah,
it's not condensed. It is very.
Yeah, I mean,
It's a long read.
it's got to be over 1,000 pages.
Yeah.
But it's worth it. So what he does is basically lay out his vision of it and he lays it out from Genesis all the way through basically the end of time. Contrasting the development of 2 intermingled cities at the same time, the city of God and the city of men. And he starts with he doesn't start the
So
book
you're talking
here.
about almost like church triumphant versus church militant, or
No, he's talking more about like the wheat and the tares.
okay.
Yeah, and
The wheat and the tares.
yeah, so that like in the parable of the wheat and the tares, where the weeds are sown in
okay.
among them.
Okay.
So the thing is that you've got here, and he starts even tracing this from Cain and Seth. So Seth being the kind of replacement doesn't sound like the right word, but you see what I mean. You know,
Right.
and these 2 cities starting even from there, diverging with one being the city after God's heart basically, and the other seeking the things of this world. And that those 2 cities, even though they're mingled, will be always in constant tension between each other. And but they're going to stay mingled until the end of time. In which case,
Which is why like the church is countercultural, right?
yes, in fact, there's a great quote in here. Actually, here we go. It has come to pass that the 2 cities could not have common laws of religion, and that the heavenly city has been compelled in this matter to dissent and to become obnoxious to those who think differently. There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the idea that, and I think that's a kind of it's an important idea. It's an important vision that there's always going to be this tension between the ways of this world and God's ways, and that you're not going to achieve this time in which you can just basically live in an unconverted but peaceful world where the church and secular society live in perfect harmony. There's always going to be tension.
So what was his idea? Like, why did he write that?
So he's writing this at the time that Rome has just been sacked, and which was unimaginable to the people at the time. And there's a bit of a persecution that revives again of the Christians, saying, well, if we'd kept up with the old sacrifices, if we'd kept following the pagan gods, then this would never would have happened, right? So he starts off then as a history of Rome. It's very fascinating. I mean, as a history book, it's just absolutely fascinating because he tracks this history of Rome and all the times for whatever they've lost in wars and so he's got, we're not to blame here. This has happened before. Then he goes through a thing of analyzing all the Roman gods from a philosophical perspective and improving basically by the methods of the philosophers themselves that they fail on their own terms. Right. So then he goes about to establish the superiority of Christianity again in their own terms. Right. So he's like saying, even by your own terms, you all should become Christian because we succeed by your own standards in terms of truth. I mean, I want to say he's not necessarily talking about triumph, like I said, in battle. I mean, we're talking about pure. It is true. And
so is it an apologetic?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
I mean, it's just like 1,000 pages of it.
Yeah.
He also just demolished a lot of heretical things going on at that time period.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so he's got like these multiple conversations in a sense going along. One against the a slight, at least, revival of paganism. Another against heresies.
That he actually, I can't remember off the top of my head. It starts with a D.
Donatists.
Donatists, yeah,
yes.
Who believed, if I remember correctly, they disclaimed the human nature of Christ.
No, the Donatists were about
the Manichaeans.
Yes, yeah, no, they did. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Manichaeans and because he demolished both of them.
Yeah, he was he in his kind of like in his journey.
Well, he was Manichaean.
Yeah,
Right,
exactly.
right, yeah.
Funny enough, his initial conversion he details, or like the beginning of his road comes from reading Cicero, which is interesting. Unfortunately, a lost work of Cicero. We don't have it anymore, but he references it and says, well, that is where, basically, I began seeking God for the love of truth. Mm-hmm. And he kind of makes Cicero the start of that. So it's an interesting kind of like to tie these together.
What's the movie about him? What's it called?
A Restless Heart.
Restless Heart. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great movie.
Actually, a good movie.
If you haven't seen
I haven't seen it. I'd like to.
Yeah, you should. Remind me, I have the DVD. I'll give it to you.
Oh, perfect.
But it is what I love about St. Augustine is that he used, he had this idea. He brought rhetoric into the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
He was like this guy who could really twist, use words to his advantage. He was kind of a lawyer. Yeah. I mean, so he took that and understood. Okay, it was almost like he developed this understanding of like, here's how you form an argument, here's how you debate people, and then he had this conversation.
He was a rhetorician, and the thing is that he had trouble kind of being, in a sense, being brought into the faith because all the arguments that he'd heard were not, it finally, through, as we know, through St. Monica's prayers, and he winds up being confronted, as it were, almost with St. Ambrose, who is a master.
Yeah, he's a stud.
And so now he starts going and listening to St. Ambrose as much as to study technique.
Yeah, he actually was taking Ambrose's homilies and using them because he was like the voice of the queen or whatever you call that. I don't remember what it's called, but he was the voice of the queen at the time. And so he was like going to church only to study what Ambrose was saying in his homilies and then taking that and paganizing it basically for his speeches for the queen.
Yeah, so
it was pretty it's like
not a bad idea.
Yeah, I don't know about I know he was a tutor. I don't know who he's a tutor of though. So yeah. Anyway, but yeah, so he was.
Pamela's laughing right now.
So Ambrose is
fart jokes.
Yeah, and so Ambrose kind of like won him over first to rhetoric. I mean, like by rhetoric,
Yeah.
and
Right.
then by content, if it makes sense.
Yeah, and when you've been a lawyer in that sense, basically you've made a living off of equivocating. Because that's what so often what you do if if you're trying to mislead someone, then you equivocate on a term and get them to kind of slide into it. So if you're that guy,
I don't know if
You're
he
not
was
gonna
that
fall
guy.
for it.
I don't know if he was that guy. I really don't know. I mean, I think I get the idea that his love of truth was sincere. It was just one of these things that's he was just looking for it in the wrong places.
yeah, well, I mean, earlier in his life when he's
partially
young.
Early in his life, he was saying that you can make up your own truths.
Yeah, I
mean,
actually
that's what that's at least what I've read.
so I think also there certainly comes in this idea that at some point along this process, he's like, now he's convinced of the truths of Christianity, but he doesn't want to give up his way of life.
Right,
Yeah.
which is something we can all connect with.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
I think that's something that people forget so often is that it's not enough to know. You have to decide.
Right.
And so he got, at first he didn't know, then he knew, but he didn't want to decide.
Right, because he was a high official at that time.
Well,
So
at the least, he had a mistress, and he didn't want to give her up. And for him, at least, now it may not be for everybody. For him, at least, he knew that if he became a Christian, that he was going to become a monk, and ultimately, as we know, he becomes a priest and a bishop and all these things. But he entering into this, and so he's like, if I do this, then there's these things I'm going to be giving up, including my mistress and to some extent my son.
but look what happens whenever
Yeah.
you do that. It's
No, I mean, not that he had to give up his son absolutely, but you see what I mean. There
Well,
would
yeah,
be,
yeah.
It would be a change.
But it's
Big
a
change.
beautiful way of the way God works, of like, where you cling on to these things and say like, oh, I can't give this up. This is what I love. And then look, what does he do? People remember St. Augustine for all of eternity, for the rest, for till the end of time, because he created all of this, this beautiful works and helped hundreds of thousands of people convert to Catholicism.
Yeah, and I mean, and there's a I can't quote it, unfortunately. I can reference it at least at the Hound of Heaven by Francis Thompson. It's like that he said, "You're afraid you're losing all these things." And I'm not quoting. This is just a paraphrase. But I kept them all for you. It's because I wanted you to seek them in me. Right. So it's that kind of thing. It's like, well, you thought you were going to lose all this stuff, but no, I had it all along, just waiting for you.
I think orator is the word I was looking for.
Yeah, I think orator was what you were going for.
Yeah, I don't think it was lawyer. I think it's orator. I think he was an orator.
Yeah, I just meant that he was a lawyer in that kind of like sleazy way.
But okay, I'm glad that word hit me. So when we get back, we're going to talk about Thomas Aquinas, because you cannot talk about philosophy without talking about Thomas Aquinas.
So true.
We're on the Lord's team.
The winning side.
So raise your glass. Dude, I'm going to get just a sip of that whiskey as well really fast.
Okay.
Between segments. Talk amongst yourself.
And then we're gonna.
Whoa.
Bro.
Something.
Sorry, I didn't realize it was attached to my foot.
Just breaking everything.
Sorry.
Okay, so I was going to take an Augustine quote that's kind of like, if you think about the scandals going on in the church right now, it's interesting to think about these two quotes. So there are many who within the church, who by their abandoned manners torment the hearts of those who live piously, since by them the Christian and Catholic name is blasphemed, and the dearer that name is to those who live piously in Christ, the more do they grieve that through the wicked who have a place within, it comes to be less loved than pious minds desire. So, I mean, again, something very much to think about, this idea of the cities being mixed, right? I got one more if we can, one more quote, because it's pretty awesome. But if these things be preferred, that even though a man seem to have faith in Christ, yet Christ is not the foundation to that man, and much more if he, in contempt of wholesome precepts, seek forbidden gratifications, is he clearly convicted of putting Christ not first but last, since he has despised him as his ruler, and has preferred to fulfill his own wicked lusts in contempt of Christ's commands and allowances.
Bold.
Yeah. So
I like bold quotes, though.
yeah, I thought you would.
That's why I like St. Louis de Montfort. That guy has some
He has some
bold things to
quotes.
say.
There you go. Yeah, I mean, I think Augustine is such a beautiful writer. He speaks in a very profound way. He mixes philosophy. I don't want to say mixes. That's not even the right word. He takes philosophy and expresses it in a very, I don't know, psychologically kind of understanding way. Like he his famous quote about our hearts being restless until they rest in Him. Things like that. This very profoundly, it's in one sense an emotional way of speaking, but it's done with clarity and reason at the same time.
Yeah. Let us proceed. Sorry, I've got to get to mass.
Yeah.
Welcome back to the Catholic Man Show. I'm David Niles, here with Adam Minahan, our special guest, Mr. Thomas Lackey. Is your middle initial A? I feel like Thomas
E.
A. Lackey. Thomas E. Lackey, that's
Yeah,
good too. Anyway, we are talking about 5 philosophers. These are 5 philosophers of Thomas's choosing that you should probably get to know. It would be good.
It'd be good.
If you don't know anything about philosophers and you're thinking, who should I start with? Maybe start here.
Yeah, also, this is a kind of slightly an aside, but you can also find, in addition to works, there's some good, audio courses and things you can find. I mean, the internet nowadays, you can get much. I think there's one by Professor Thomas Williams through the teaching company on, I think it's called Faith and Reason, which would be an excellent intro to Catholic philosophy.
Yeah, dude, the internet.
Yeah, so I mean, just throw that out right now because it'd be really good to everybody would enjoy it, I think.
Okay, so now we're going to move on to St. Thomas Aquinas, who is a protege of our previous philosopher in many ways.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that St. Thomas is profoundly Augustinian. Now, people kind of emphasize the influence of Aristotle, but he quotes Augustine more than any other theologian.
Right.
And so while he does bring in this, the Aristotelian elements, he's certainly coming also with the Platonic.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
insights.
he would say things like Augustine's when he's making an argument. He'll say, "Well, Augustine said this."
Yeah, and he just pretty much leaves it there,
as if
Yeah.
like, there you go.
Yeah.
Augustine said.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, he has now he will disagree with St. Augustine on occasion, but I mean, but he has a profound respect for St. Augustine.
It'd been sweet if they lived at the same time period.
And Matt Fradd, who is a big, he's a big guy on St. Thomas. He often compares the two about how St. Thomas is beautiful in his own way. St. Augustine is beautiful like a work of art or a poem, and St. Thomas is beautiful like a razor or a tool is beautiful just because it's precise and
clear cut. So
yes.
So I think that what's might be slightly surprising is my recommendations on what to read for St. Thomas, which is to read, if you're talking about primary sources, to read his commentaries on the 10 Commandments and on there's a bundle you can get. There's like on the 3 greatest prayers, but they're individual works on the Lord's Prayer, the Creed, and the Hail Mary. So I would say those would be a great way to kind of like get into reading Aquinas. A little more popular level. They were delivered, I don't know if they were all this way, but at least many of them were delivered as Lenten sermons, and people would come and they'd listen to him speak, all during Lent, and he would, expound on the prayers of the church and on the commandments.
Yeah, I say that he's like kind of this razor, not poetic and beautiful,
but he wrote some beautiful
actually,
poems.
yes, some of the prayers he wrote.
We still say today.
Yeah, like the Tantum Ergo and like some of these the most beautiful Latin prayers that we have.
Yeah,
and you read the translations and it's like, wow.
Yeah, so
Bonaventure had the same thought.
Well, I was about to say they were both. There's a story. They were both hired to write a mass setting, and they were. I don't know if they were doing it together or what, but Aquinas sent Bonaventure what he had written so far, and Bonaventure immediately tore up and burned everything that he had written. It's like, I No,
Yeah,
you, dude.
I think sometimes Thomas Aquinas gets that reputation for being very dry.
Yeah,
and it's not fair. It really isn't. I mean, he's a wonderful poet. He has a heart that's truly on fire for Christ.
Yeah.
So it's where do you even begin? Kind of with Aquinas. So I'm going to give a quote, just a little thing that would be from the opening to the commentary on the Ten Commandments. And he says, 3 things are necessary for man to be saved: knowledge of what is to be believed, knowledge of what is to be desired, and knowledge of what is to be done. The first is taught in the Creed, where knowledge of the articles of faith is given. The second in the Lord's Prayer, and the third is the law. So that's why I'm recommending those commentaries specifically. He comments on the Creed, comments on the law, comments on the Lord's Prayer. So,
those are they available on?
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
You can buy them. But...
You can buy them. You can find them online too. And if you're going to go to, it is useful to have introductions to mystic philosophy. Sometimes if you're going to try to hop into the Summa or something. So, one, I would say you might just plain hop in in Tertia Pars question 73, which is the Eucharist. The beginning of the Eucharist goes through question 79, I think, maybe 80, and just start reading that. It's actually, it's not that bad, and especially now that you have, if you listen to the other podcast, some of the decodering terminology. But if you want, but also Peter Kraft put out a couple of books, a shorter Summa. And an even shorter Summa. I don't even know what the title of the second one is. It's itty bitty. The glossary alone would be worth having, in terms of trying to understand. What does he mean when he says phantasm or something like that? That kind of terminology you just don't use every day. So that would also be a recommendation. And then in kind of more modern Thomistic philosopher, Joseph Pieper is fantastic. Hard to go wrong.
The Peepster, as we call him.
Yeah, absolutely.
Here on the show.
Yep. Yeah. So hard to go wrong there. Well,
I think that St. Thomas stands alone in that other philosophers are described. Oh, what type of philosopher was he? He's a Stoic, or
Yeah.
St. Thomas is his own genre.
Thomist.
Which
he would actually hate. He would actually hate what I've heard is that he would hate being referenced as that because he does not want to be original. He does not want to be, because the most being unoriginal is I just want to imitate Christ, which is unoriginal. Christ is original.
Yeah, it's famous.
So,
nothing but thyself, Lord.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So.
Right. So I've read somewhere, I can't even remember where it was, but a commentary on Thomas and them saying he would be rolling over in his grave, knowing that there were Thomists after his own name, because he did not want to be known as this, his own philosophy.
Right.
I don't want to be original. I just want to be unoriginal. I want to be like Christ. That who is original, who is the original.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. So you're right. He does kind of stand alone. He's almost he's such a monument that it's a little hard to try to where do you start?
Okay, so what about so he was also a mystic, right?
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about that, because that's a fun part.
Yeah, there's the famous story of him. I think it was his confessor that observed this, and that him being spoken to. I'm gonna maybe get this right, maybe this wrong. I can't remember if it was where exactly the voice was coming from, but it's more or less the effect of you've written well of me. What would you have? And he replies, nothing but thyself, Lord, which is a quote I use. But it's such a beautiful. But then after this experience, he stops writing the Summa. He said, everything I've written is like straw. Now the Lord himself, did approve. You've written well of me, but he's like, I just can't. I can't.
Yeah, which is
go on.
It's this whiskey is really, really great, but now that I see the beatific vision, this whiskey is nothing.
Yeah.
That's a bad analogy.
But also it's what he said was just wrong. I know why he said it. By comparison, what he has done is just totally worthless, when you compare it to God himself. But it's it's not straw.
Yeah, we still,
Tom.
Yeah, we thank you for writing it.
Yes.
Yeah. So
I like to think about play the idea because what council was he on the way to before he died? Right before he died. He was,
yeah, he was on the way to a council. I don't remember.
I can't remember
which.
what council. It was,
I don't know.
Yeah,
I can't remember which one. But it was a big council, and it's like, what would have happened if he was there?
Well, but we got to accept it by providence. I guess it wasn't meant to be,
right?
But it is a shame.
Okay, so let's talk about really fast how he writes the Summa, because Summa is what everybody hears about. I'm a guy who maybe I'm just now opening the Summa for the first time. What should I expect?
Well, you should expect that it's a very structured layout. What he'll do is he'll propose a question, then he'll propose various objections that people might raise, and then he will have a section which is on the contrary, usually where he will marshal
his response, basically.
The start, but this is where he'll marshal arguments from authorities, like from the fathers of the church and things like that, and then he'll have the body of his response, which will be where he makes the argument philosophically or theologically. But I mean, so he's like spelling out the argument. So he'll get question, objections, a quick reply where he argues just straight from authority, and then he'll go into the next thing and he'll explain in detail, and then if necessary he'll reply to the objections in detail as well.
Okay, so but the things that you recommended, his commentaries, those aren't written in that question.
No, they're not written
response.
in that form.
Okay, we have 20 seconds. Why is philosophy important? Why should men care?
It's the search for truth.
It's the search. That's why Oshin, everybody who's listening right now, that's why you should be looking for more philosophers.
Yeah, it's the love of wisdom.
Mining these people's thoughts, so that way, because the more you know truth, the more you love it.
Yep, and our Lord is the way, the truth, and the life.
Yeah, I guess in that way, from that standpoint, philosophy is the same as the study of divinity. If you're just studying truth, you're studying God in many ways.
Yeah, it's the question of whether or not you're doing it by natural reason, which is the way of philosophy, or by faith, which is, by revelation.
Excellent.
Thomas, man, thanks so much for hanging out with us these 2 episodes. If you just now tuning in, check out the one on the Eucharist as well. Appreciate it, man.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
We're on the Lord's team.
The winning side.
So raise your glass.
And cheers to Jesus.